and Elections Committee, which actually only has 2 members these days, myself and Councilmember Wesson. Ms. Hahn is no longer a councilwoman, but a congresswoman. And we do have both a regular agenda and a special agenda today. Let's go ahead and take up the regular agenda item, the new appointment of our Mr. nominee. Come on forward. It'll be like a conversation instead of a scary committee hearing. Congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you very much.
So tell me your interest in serving on the Los Angeles Ethics Commission and why you think you'll be a good member and some of the things you'd like to accomplish.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. My background is growing up here. I was born at UCLA in the hospital there in Los Angeles, and after going away for college and law school, came back to Los Angeles. And the first real job I had after clerking for a federal judge here in downtown Los Angeles was being involved in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And of the 7 years, I spent 5 of it in the Public Corruption and Government Fraud Squad. And in that division, you would see the violations, sadly, of various, whether it's election laws, public disclosure laws, or just general corruption committed by public officials. I worked on the sheriffs that were involved in narcotics and money laundering cases. I worked on some investigations dealing with public officials. And you get the sense that they were the exception rather than the rule, but that it was extremely important to make sure that those rules in particular are being followed. Because as you well know as an elected official, one elected official has the capacity to influence a tremendous amount of activity. And making sure that someone's looking over the shoulder of the elected official and making sure they comply with the rules is sort of why we, at least at the federal level, have the divisions of government and hopefully avoid the problems that come with power that's unchecked. After that, I switched to the defense camp and had the opportunity to represent people. And in some ways, when you start out very young as a prosecutor, life looks very black and white. You don't really have the life experiences to see grays in this world. On the defense side, I joined a firm that my father started 50 years ago. And you get to see, again, more the human dimension, sort of what went into the decisions that led a person astray. And you also get to see the system going after a person, good, bad, or indifferent, sometimes very well justified, and other times not. And so often that depends on who's involved in making the key decisions. So again, seeing it on both sides of the fence, both as a prosecutor, trying to figure out where the lines are, where right and wrong is, and then going after the people on the other side of the line. And then on the defense side, having the opportunity to see the power of the system that it can bring against any particular individual, and how you have to make sure that the people who exercise that power do it very carefully and within the parameters of the law, gives me hopefully a balanced perspective to now bring to this job, which is to, again, take the laws that are in place, the ethical laws dealing with campaigns, elections, elected officials, and bring a very clear focus to both the job and to those laws, and to make sure that the public, who in some ways looks at the Ethics Commission as one of the watchdogs of government, that they have the trust, and they can place the trust in the Ethics Commission to carry out their duty. Because at the end of the day, most people don't have the time, some don't have the desire and whatnot, because they're just trying to put food on the table to figure out what's going on in a room like this. I mean, it's in a perfect world, this room would be packed. This room, this
Usually is. Don't worry.
And it would not just be on C-SPAN 3, 2, or 1, but it would be on primetime TV, and the average citizen would get a chance to really see the government work all the time. As we know, that's a rare opportunity, and a rare citizen that takes advantage of those opportunities. They exist, it's just taking advantage of them. So what I think the system is designed to set up is people like the ones who sit in the Ethics Commission, who will take time out of their day, use their body of experiences and training to bring that to the table. And to the extent that there are people who need to or not even people, to the extent that the system needs to advertise the fact that here are the laws and here's why they're fair. And you, the citizens, if you think there's a problem with that, let us know. And we'll do our best to then let you know what the law is and bring that to the council's attention. And similarly, to the extent that the council has any issues with any particular laws. Again, the Ethics Commission works as sort of a transit point between the citizens and the elected officials to hopefully work out a system that's both fair, easy to administer. And I know that this system has both local and state laws that sometimes either conflict or don't overlap perfectly with each other. But that to me would be one of the goals, is to make sure that the system is easy to administer, easy to understand, and then fully enforced.
So why do you want to be part of it?
To finish sort of my personal history, after spending 11 years on the defense side, I got a rare opportunity mid-career to go back to the government for a year and ran the tax division in the Department of Justice in the last year, basically, of the Bush administration. And then it's rare you know the date of your resignation, but I knew the date and the time of my resignation, which was 12 noon, January 20th, 2009. Which, as all the other politicals experienced, you were out of a job and had to go find a new one. Working in government is something that I love to do. I mean, it's just that you really feel that you wake up in the morning and you're serving something beyond yourself. Being able to do that and also, work in private practice and help individual clients and corporate clients sort of achieve justice in whatever in whatever avenues they're seeking, to me presents a great balance. So I get my civic duty on sort of hopefully on this side, and then my private put food on the table duties on this side. I mean, it would be if I get this opportunity, it'd be a wonderful opportunity to bring and channel my civic desires into something that I hope will be very productive.
Well, thank you for answering the call, and it's not for the pay. I know that you took it. I wanted to just ask you a couple questions. You're clearly extremely qualified for this position. I think you've been able to see, as you described, both sides of the criminal justice system, though that's only a part. There's also the policy ends of what we do in ethics work. But there's obviously been a lot of legal decisions in the last few months, and then before that in the last year, on campaign finance. And we have a pretty well-developed system here of ethics laws, but also of our campaign finance laws and our public financing. What's your sense of where that is going, what we can do, what you'd like to do, where you come down on those sorts of issues as well, in terms of as a backer of, is there utility in that? Are we seeing, because of the Supreme Court decisions recently, a move away from that? Is there a way to preserve that? Do you want to preserve that? So give me a little background in that area.
I've seen the memo that's come out with respect to the impact on the Supreme Court's decision on the Arizona matching grant, invalidation of the matching grant system and how it'll apply to certain aspects of our matching grants. Again, to the extent it's on all fours, I am sure that both the city attorney's office and the council will eventually see that, unless the Supreme Court changes its mind, those portions of the program will have to get reformed. I am a big fan of disclosure, full stop. I mean, I think that what the voters are most entitled to is to know who's doing what and who's supporting what, and to what extent. Our system is set up that way, that the voters, at the end of the day, if they have the information, they should be able to then make the intelligent choices. The law is not designed to treat people as infants. It's designed to treat people as adults, and if you give them the information, the core assumption is they'll make an adult decision with that information. Making sure that information is as widely and disseminated as possible, I think our system can do better. I think our system has, the technology that exists today that didn't exist 5 years ago, and the way it's being disseminated amongst average people who it's nice to send them a mailer, or in some campaign seasons, a mailbox full of mailers. But nowadays, you can send that same mailer out 1,000 times, 100,000 times, instantaneously with the push of a button. And figuring out how best to, but the problem with that is that in some ways it overclutters. It gives you too much information. It's hard to figure out where to get the important information. I, as a voter in the city of Los Angeles, should have somewhere I can go that if I want to see, instantaneously, all the major donors to a particular campaign, initiative, candidate, or whatnot, I know to go to a particular site, click a button or two, and I can get the list. And the list can be searchable by a variety of terms so that the information is available to me. I think that to the extent that the City Ethics Commission can work with this committee and the council to figure out how best to make the put some teeth in and reality in the disclosure area, the Supreme Court seems to suggest that that is still okay.
I don't know if you've been to the ethics database, but it's actually quite robust. We've even licensed it out to other cities. Like today, I think the beginning of the mayoral candidates have already posted up. You can go and see right there, search it by fragment of last name, first name, employer, things like that. So I think some of that is there, but would love to work with you if you had ideas on how to even make that more robust and to strengthen that. What's your opinion, though, in general on public funds? That's on the disclosure side, but are you a supporter of public funding of campaigns?
I am. I mean, I am consistent with the law.
Right.
And that's an evolving topic as to what consistent with the law really means in this area. Mm-hmm. Whether it means that you figure out a way to allow. I mean, I know that the public funding in some ways dovetails with contribution limits. Mm-hmm. I mean, in some ways, if you have this very small contribution limits, mm-hmm. you're encouraging a lot of people to give a lot more money. Mm-hmm. I know one of the issues being considered is whether or not to raise the contribution limits mm-hmm. and the effect that has on the smaller voter, mm-hmm. The one who's not able to give $2,000 but can give $50. Mm-hmm. And will a particular candidate spend more of his time with the candidate, as one would expect, mm-hmm. With the donors who can give a $2,000 gift as opposed to the ones who can give a $25 gift, mm-hmm. At least to the extent they need to raise money. Mm-hmm. So I've always been a big fan within constitutional limits of figuring out how you can increase the ability of candidates to get out their message. Mm-hmm. Whether it's, everything from, and this is more at the federal level, free media, mm-hmm. Where you allow candidates to equal access to stuff that, and in some ways use the rules of the FCC to help promote this, mm-hmm. to mashing grants within limits. Mm-hmm. And then allow, obviously, people who can raise more, they will necessarily get out their message more. Although I'm hoping, and this is the ultimate hope here of technology, is that technology will reduce the price point of getting your message out to the point where a lot of what we've been talking about in raising these vast sums does not become necessary. Mm-hmm. That's the promise of technology.
I hope so one day. That'd be nice. Thank you for that. Where do you live, by the way? I had the.
I live in Beverly Hills Post Office.
Okay.
So it's.
So Council District 5?
Yeah, Paul Kretz,
okay.
Yes.
All right, gotcha. Okay. No, I didn't even see the address, but I just didn't have any idea, so it wasn't that I thought you lived outside the city. But and I think the moves of council members and the Ethics Commission discussing, part of it is not just the. It's how much time do we want our candidates to be spending on fundraising. There's definitely a minimum amount you want. You don't want it to be so easy that they're not doing that at all. But over time, if there's no adjustment of limits in real terms, it's less and less as costs go up and up, and so you spend more and more time not necessarily talking to voters but talking to donors.
I mean, it's an incredible dilemma that every candidate faces, is that, in Los Angeles, in some ways, it's too big mm-hmm. that you have to, to not use TV media. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure I haven't seen the studies, but the candidates, if you looked at how much time they got to spend on TV mm-hmm. in paid advertising versus the ones who didn't, yeah. I am guessing the paid advertising candidates won more often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think so as well.
So it's, but to the extent that media is going to hopefully at some point in my lifetime switch away from TV,
right.
and then go either to social media, internet, or these new forms of technology and communication, the price point on that is just incredibly cheaper.
Yeah.
Which would then hopefully mean that candidates will actually spend more time shaking hands and trying to get the votes than having to hold fundraisers, which, unfortunately they have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're looking forward to collaborating, getting the council and commission together to have those discussions. Everybody who makes it to the council by definition has some experience in the area, so they're subject matter experts to some degree, which is rare for all 15 to have, or 14 in this case, to have that. So, well, thank you again. Good places you've been educated at, great work experience. I think some good perspectives. Glad to hear you support because we're going to have to be creative about maintaining some sort of public financing system in the city, especially in the face of the growing role of independent expenditures. So I see those as really our big challenges, both the Ethics Commission and the council. So looking forward very much to serving together.
As I am as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we'll forward it as a recommendation from the chair. You don't get the full committee stamp because we don't have a majority of the committee here, but a recommendation from the chair to approve the nomination. And we'll see you in council. Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate it. All right, we'll go to the special meeting now, and let's go ahead and take up item number 1. I guess we'll take a few of these together, maybe. Let's see.
Charles Monaco, CLA's office. Items 1 and 2 both relate to a communication from the city attorney and an ordinance relative to adjusting the city's matching funds program to comply with the Supreme Court decision in the Arizona Enterprise case. Item 1 is the original communication from the city attorney, and item number 2 is a motion, I believe it's Alarcon-Koretz, as well as an ordinance prepared by the city attorney in response to that motion.
Okay. I think we've been able to go over the memo before. Is there anything you want to highlight, and any I know you've dutifully looked at drafting other things, but any advice on from the legal side, and then I'll get some from the policy side as well, on where we're at, what you recommend that we do, and Mr. Alarcon's motion as well, and any issues on that.
Good afternoon, Councilmember, Deputy City Attorney Renee Stottle. Yes, I won't go over, unless you wish me to, the Arizona decision.
I think I think everybody in here has probably done their homework on that. For the 4,000 visitors on council phone, we'll just ask them to come to council or to contact you for more.
The guidance that I would give you today is the recommendation that we had made is because of the Arizona decision, at least the matching funds trigger provisions that are provided in the primary election and general election should be suspended for the special vacancy election for CD15 while we continue to study what other changes should be done on a more permanent basis in the run-up to the 2013 election. In terms of timing, the ordinance that we originally transmitted was simply that, to suspend those 2 matching funds trigger provisions. Councilmember Alarcon's motion also added 2 other elements to that, which was to also raise the spending limit and to provide a higher amount of available matching funds.
And that was regardless of how, there's no trigger to it, it was just raise it, full stop, that it's too low or something might have been. Does anybody, you want to maybe come forward so we can hear a little motivation? We'll hear from you in a sec, but come on the table in the meantime.
And there's no legal issue with the Councilmember Alarcon's proposal. I just want to stress to you and to the council, because the window for candidates filing and deciding whether to be part of the matching funds program begins on August 22nd. We need to adopt an ordinance at least to remove those trigger provisions so it's effective before that date. And because of the time frame for the mayor to sign an ordinance and for the council to hear it, I would strongly encourage the council to adopt an ordinance that at least removes those trigger provisions in a very short time frame.
Okay. All right. Said, do you want to give us a little idea of the motivations and the thinking?
I want to just anyone who's listening need to know that bureaucrats can be extremely pleasing. The councilman wanted, thank you, Mr. President, the councilman wanted me to represent to you that his goal is, given the Supreme Court's decision and its potential impact on cities that have created, quote unquote, kind of a clean campaign program for running the election, that the special election for the 15th district offers an opportunity to study a potential impact of the kind of proposal he has on the table. He leaves entirely to your wisdom and the committee's in terms of whether the amount and the nature of what he's suggesting is appropriate, and of course the Ethics Commission. But his point really is that this would be a great opportunity with a limited scope for one time only to see what possible impact it might have on that special election. And then this can feed into a number of other proposals that are now circulating to deal with the larger issue as to what the city should do.
But the motivation for the impact is to see whether a higher amount does what specifically?
That it encourages candidates who are not as generously financially endowed as perhaps what the others might be.
So there's no trigger, but it's in essence it acts as a disincentive to either independent expenditures or individually wealthy campaigns?
Right.
Okay.
And an encouragement to those who are not financially as well off.
Okay.
That's
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's bring up the Ethics Commission staff, Executive Director. So there's practical as well as policy questions that I have on. I think one is fine. I have maybe a question or two on that, but let me focus on the motion from Mr. Alarcon first. I don't know if it was you or somebody in council, I think it was you, mentioned when you start doing the math and we start looking at the balance. Obviously, we want to make sure, and I have to be careful in these discussions due to certain speculation and other things, but I have council members who are running for office and et cetera, et cetera. But, so I want to ask this as objectively as I can. We will have citywide elections, a lot of vacancies for council seats coming up, and we'll replenish each year only so much. Give us a rundown on the financial condition right now of our matching fund, what the impact of this could or could not be, or of any raising, and what do you think is going to be available for that round of elections in 2013?
Sure. Heather Holt for the Ethics Commission. The trust fund is currently funded at a little bit more than $12 million. If we went with the proposal for the special elections in Council District 15, as proposed in Mr. Alarcon's motion, we expect that the requirement in matching funds money would be approximately $1.45 million for that election. That assumes
Total or above what you would have done?
Total.
Okay.
And that would be $916,000 more than we would expect to pay out under current law. The trust fund can absorb that cost for this election. We run into difficulties immediately, however, if this formula is applied to all candidates in all city races. The 2013 elections we anticipate to be very competitive because we have a lot of open council seats and the citywide races as well on that ballot. We are envisioning it's very similar to the 2001 elections.
How much was spent that year?
In that year, we spent $8.5 million approximately in matching funds money. We estimate that that number would go up to $16.75 million in the 2013 elections if the Alarcon motion were made permanent law that applied to all city candidates. And we would not have enough in the trust fund to fully fund all candidates. In fact, we estimate that we would be almost $5 million short in terms of fully funding all candidates. And of course, I have to give the great caveat that this is all projection, and we don't know what the actual numbers will be until we get to a race and we know how many people have filed to be participating candidates, and even after that, how many qualify to receive matching funds. But based on historical data and the assumption that this change would encourage more people to participate in the matching funds program, this is actually a pretty conservative estimate.
Well, how much was spent on just the citywides in 2005? Do you know?
In 2005, on just the citywides, I don't know that I have them broken down separately, but I can get you that information.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if we added up, 2001's a decade off now, and maybe it's not a lot different. But if I was trying to combine like more recent mayoral plus wide open council or more wide open council seats.
Well, we did actually, I don't know if this helps, but we did calculate numbers or projections for the cost to the matching funds program if the formula used in Mr. Alarcon's motion were applied only to city council candidates and not to citywide candidates. That would reduce the 16.75 in 2013 to 10.8.
Which is right about where the balance would be.
Exactly. And this balance, I should add to, the deficit and the balance in 2013 does take into consideration additional appropriations that would be coming in the next fiscal year.
So that was my next question. Sorry, the 10.65 or the 12 million takes into account appropriations also?
It does.
So right now the balance isn't that high?
That's correct.
Okay. And so if we drop down beneath what is required to fulfill matching fund requirements under the current policy, how does the charter work there? What happens? Is the Ethics Commission or the fund due extra money, or does it run out? Do you write candidates and say, sorry, we have no more money? Or?
The Ethics Commission is required to assess the balance in the trust fund at least twice prior to each election, and give candidates notice of what the funding formula will be. We generally always provide 100% funding because the trust fund has been sufficiently funded. We would have to come up with another formula, some percentage of maximum funding that would be granted to each candidate in the 2013 election if this were made a permanent citywide change.
Now, I'm sure there's a few advocates in this room that wouldn't mind seeing the trust fund expanded for future policy considerations. To keep up with the idea of disincentivizing the impact of independent expenditures and wealthy candidates as well. Do you or do the Ethics Commission have any hesitation to, in general, that concept that Mr. Alarcon's motion puts forward of that maybe there should be higher limits to disincentivize that, or do you think that the flip side of that is there's some sort of, we could make it $2 million tomorrow as disincentivizing, but it also is raising elections to be more expensive and higher threshold. How do you balance those two?
Well, that's an excellent question. It does need to be balanced, and the Ethics Commission is absolutely in favor of a public funding system that is attractive to candidates and that is effective in allowing more people to run for office and expanding the base of candidates from which voters can choose. So we are definitely in favor of the concept of adjusting the laws in light of the Arizona decision to compensate for the fact that the trigger provisions would be eliminated. At this point, we have not been able to come up with a creative option that is different from eliminating those trigger options. So it looks like that's the way we need to go. And compensating for that, I think, is an important component of an attractive and workable public financing program. Where we draw that line takes a little more finessing, I think, in terms of looking at the data and what the numbers would actually be, and comparing that to historical data about what is typically spent in an election, what does it take, what does it cost to run a winning campaign, and so all of these things need to be considered.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking for myself and thinking aloud, I mean, it is a tough thing for me to figure out where I'd even come down on that as well. But I do want to give it some thought, and I think it's worth. We are increasingly, especially in our council elections, there's been a big impact in our citywide, but the cost is so much more of independent expenditures outshining even the relevance. I mean, we're on the brink of what you raise is less important than who spends money on you, even in council races. We saw that recently, though the numbers didn't always correspond to the winners. It's more complicated than just money winning elections, but I'm sure it helped them be more competitive. So you want to be able to have the emphasis go back to, in my opinion, old-fashioned candidates raising money themselves, because it's a more straightforward, more honest, less removed form of campaigning, and so, you know, in that sense, I would move towards, you know, council races having the ability to have much higher caps, similar to what Mr. Alarcon has said, and then it becomes a budgeting issue. Okay, do we find the money for that? And that shouldn't be necessarily your problem. You say, okay, if you want this, policymakers, give us more money, and you can be neutral about that. For advocates, I think there's some worry, and I would share some of that to some degree, that candidates, the other side of that is that it becomes tougher and tougher for individual candidates to emerge who don't have really big networks and who don't know wealthy people and things like that, which is where the matching comes in. And I think in some ways raising the cap and keeping a lot more matching gives people that ability to keep up. You can't go to infinity with it, but some ability to go up. So I'm very open to that and interested to hear where the council comes in, but I think I really want the commission to be able to weigh in on that too. We've got CD15 race coming up, which is why we're kind of pressed to we will do what we need to do on the Supreme Court stuff, grudgingly and whatever. We'll just do it. I'm sure people will support that. Resolving this in terms of the CD15 election requires kind of a two-step discussion by the council, or you add on this philosophically, and two, okay, if you're for this, are you willing to fund this? And if we fund it, will this be, speaking to Mr. Alarcon, he said, I think this will be a good precedent for the future. So I think he is doing it with an eye to the future, but then the cost of that eye to the future is going to be significant in a very difficult budget time. It's interesting what you say, if you just did it with city council candidates. I mean, certainly it could be a freer conversation for a lot of us, but I think that that may achieve some of that, where we've just seen the impact, because it doesn't take a lot of independent expenditure money to have a big impact in a race where people are only raising a couple $100,000 to be able to counterbalance that. So I think Mr. Alarcon's headed in the right direction, certainly for the city council ones. I think what I will do is ask between, we have this scheduled for council next week, Wednesday. So it gives us a week. Ethics Commission's not meeting between now and then, are they?
They're not, no. But we'd be happy to provide data if that's.
Yeah, sure. It's helpful. I like opinions too, though.
Yes. Well, we can come up with some of those too.
Sure, good. Well, I'd be, you know, I know you have to also listen to what your commissioners
Yes.
are interested in doing and saying. So I think with a week, we'll at least have some more data, some time for all of us to think about it. I would encourage you to encourage commissioners to communicate with us, and/or if they want to come to testify. I know you won't be able to do it as a body, but they certainly look at this, and because of the short window, it's not that whatever we do for CD15 writes in stone what's going to happen after, but but it would be a significant precedent, and this is not a case of council acting slowly or City Hall not, you know, jamming something through. It's really the timing of the special election that we're all victim of. So I would encourage them to come forward and be able to either communicate it to us in writing or in person before then. And what I think I'll do is I'll forward it right now without comment for or against, but just give me some time to think about it, everybody else some time as well to weigh in. So send this to the council with a communication from me for options for council action. I would also ask, and I know we've talked about, and we'll probably hear in public comment, one of the ideas that advocates had was just, well, take the trigger amount. It's a lower amount, but just raise it by that amount instead of losing the 25,000 or it was 25,000, I think. Put that into the larger fund now, and so maybe that could be one of the options that people have.
We have numbers on that if you're interested.
Sure. Yeah. What would that?
We estimate that for the special election, the matching funds requirement under that scenario would be $800,000, which would be about $266,000 more than we would expect to spend under current law. And in the 2013 election, we estimate that proposal would cost for all candidates about $10.65 million, so significantly less than the numbers that would be required under the Mr. Alarcon's motion.
I mean, from what I hear out there in the real world of politics, there are at least 3 clumpings of groups of folks who are looking to do independent expenditures in a single council district. When I ran, I think there was, I was the beneficiary of an independent expenditure by the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles for like a couple $100, like for some radio ads. I've seen some other ones in the past, but it has been like a tidal wave all of a sudden. When we saw in Council District 2 special election, it has gone from, you know, a single-digit percentage of impact, maybe low double, to way eclipsing the amount that's being spent. So it is something we definitely try to need to, within the confines of the Supreme Court decisions, tackle. So why don't I hear public comment on these 2 items, unless you have anything else to add, either of you?
No, but
Yeah.
before you conclude, just want to clarify if you will be, that whether you'll be instructing our office to come back with another ordinance that includes.
These other possibilities?
Yes.
So it's been sounding like to me like there's 2 different ordinances, but if you put them together in one, you tell me. I mean, the first one is to get rid of the trigger requirements. If Mr. Alarcon had his motion go forward, or a different version of that, is that kind of either an amendment to that, or is it a separate?
Actually, I've already transmitted that ordinance, and
Right.
so that combines
separate
both
ord-
the trigger and
Oh, you
his
put 'em
other
together. Okay.
ideas. But if there's a desire to have yet another alternative that,
Well, if they
Raises-
didn't want to move on Mr. Alarcon's or anybody else's, you can take that part out easily? Or is it not? Or is it now embedded in it, so it's?
it's right now, it's embedded in it.
I think what we're going to need, if it's not too much work, Madam City Attorney, is to keep everything honest, is to give people the option of, okay, that's nice, we'll look at it in the future, so let's just keep to the bare minimum of I think what you transmitted to us originally, so you should have that written. Then the one with the Alarcon, and why don't we add the one other one that we might hear about in public testimony. I assume in the Alarcon one, if people say, oh, this is too low, we want to go higher, it's too high, we want to go lower, that piece is easy to change. It's more
That,
the mechanism.
if we're just changing numbers that are directly before, in the ordinance that I transmitted, that's easier to deal with, because that's
Yeah.
potentially interlineating just a number versus another provision that I need to write.
Okay.
But clarification on this proposal, whether that includes the 3-to-1 match in both the primary and the general election, which are currently part of the trigger provisions, and whether the intention is to apply that 3-to-1 match through the entire primary and general elections, in addition to raising the maximum
Yes.
amount of money in the general.
Yes.
Okay.
And the numbers that I gave you do incorporate the 3-to-1 match in both the primary and the general.
Right. So I would request that you submit a draft ordinance to make the CD15 candidates, and I want to listen to public comments, so I don't want to
Yeah.
prejudge all this tentatively, automatically eligible for the 3-to-1 match, and general election candidates would be eligible for the maximum of 150K instead of 125K. Okay?
Thank you.
Great. Speaking of folks who may spend on the special election, but we'll get to Mr. Repovich after 2 other people. Trent Lang is our first speaker. Sure. And then we'll hear from Kathy Feng.
Thank you. Yes, we are unlikely to spend on the special election. Trent Lang, President of the California Clean Money Campaign. We do, of course, sadly have to agree that the triggers have to be removed due to the Arizona case. We definitely share Councilmember Alarcon's concerns that doing so would leave candidates at risk to high-spending candidates and independent expenditures in a way that they aren't under current law. And so something needs to be done to raise the caps, and we are definitely very positively in favor, in general, of increasing the public funds available for candidates so that they can be more responsive to the public and not have to fundraise as much, as well as, in the right circumstances, raising the caps. I guess our concerns would be shared with those of the Ethics Commission that unless council agrees to increase the amounts of funds that are going into the trust fund, then as a precedent, it could be problematic for future costs. So that's something to be aware of. And we would definitely be concerned in general with raising the spending caps for candidates who agree to the system without a full overall package of reforms, and generally speaking, that address problems that constituents have, that so much of funds are raised from large donors. Even with the system, so much is raised from outside of the district. CCMC studies showed that in general, council candidates only raise about 15% of their funds from individuals in the district. That is, except for certain CDs, yes. But on average, that's what that is, and that's just amazingly low, and it makes constituents concerned that they're not addressed. So it should be part of the larger package. We would agree with the third proposal to remove the triggers and increase to the 3-to-1 match on the $150,000 that they would get under current law if they were actually facing large opponents. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy?
President Garcetti. So I'll just cut to the chase because I think we're largely in agreement with Trent. I think it's helpful to think about what the purpose of the matching fund system is for, and then think about how we can make short-term tweaks in response to the CD15 election that's coming up, but then also support a longer-term approach. I quickly jotted down some of the things that I think we're trying to do. One of them is that we're trying to encourage candidates to run elections that emphasize communication with their constituents as opposed to simply going after big donors, particularly big donors who are outside of your district. And the idea, obviously, is that ultimately you, in a democratic system, you should be responsive to the folks who elected you. And the second piece is to encourage qualified candidates to be able to have sufficient amount of funds so that they can run a good competitive campaign and maybe be able to step off of the fundraising treadmill so that they're not constantly dialing for dollars, which I imagine most people who finally do get into office find was not the original reason why they got into this business. So
There are a few of us that are still idealists.
yeah, I think that's right. And I think even those people who aren't idealists find it to be a pain in the butt. So I think. So I think that if we think about that, while the two components that are brought up in the Englander-Krikorian proposal to adjust the spending limits and adjust the campaign contributions are pieces that we've been talking about, when taken in isolation, the problem is that sort of throws those goals out of whack. You then have a system that sort of encourages people to raise a lot of money, to be able to spend a lot of money without the other component part, which is connecting with your constituents and getting off of the fundraising treadmill. We do strongly support the, I guess, option 3 for short-term purposes. And then for long-term purposes, we've started to lay out the details that I think are captured in what is your item number 3 in the Huizar motion. Okay. I think a lot of those pieces need to be hashed out, so that's why I think a report is a good one. But I'm hopeful that people on council will see that Huizar's motion captures some of the very things that people are worried about while also adjusting everything, whether it's the matching process, the ratio of match, as well as the total amount of money that people can get in the match, and incentivizing that you start raising from people either within the district or at least within the city who are actual people and not just corporations or entities. Thank you.
From the League of Protective Police, Mr. Pete Repovich. From the Special Interest Corner.
I like that. We should incorporate that name. Good afternoon, Mr. President. I'm going to speak a little bit more in general terms. I think as a result of the CD15 race, people, want to do a lot of things, and I think it's real important to go slow about what they end up doing. I don't think that you're ever going to really be able to compete, match, keep up with independent expenditures. So we would just ask, number one, we're concerned about spending public dollars, and any kind of dollar we can keep within the Treasury of the City of Los Angeles we'd like to see that happen, especially in light of, the current couple of years of budgets that we've had. So to go slow on what you articulate down the road or change as a result of CD15, we're not in favor, basically, of raising anything that costs the city more money. So while I understand, and having been a candidate, I understand getting the message out is expensive. We don't think that the public should be so vehemently involved in that process with general fund dollars. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. All right. So that'll be the action on 1 and 2 to forward those draft ordinances. And to, the only thing that I would keep here is to ask the Ethics Commission still, I've said this in council, but to try to see if we can work together, the council and Ethics Commission together to, well, I guess we're going to get into this a little bit with 3 and 4, so why don't I hold off that, because that just had to do with CD 15. So why don't we take up 3 and 4. Rick Coco, if you want to come forward on number 3. And Mr. Tesler from the fine offices of Council Districts 14 and 12. We'll take up both of these items together.
Council President Rick Coker with Councilmember Weezer's office. Just, coming up here to ask for your support to move this along to council and that a study be done. Obviously, as everybody's spoken about, there is a need to address our matching funds program, and as Measure H, not the 1990 version, but the 2011 version, which you co-sponsored with us, it asked the voters to, lift the spending cap and make a more robust system. And so we've been charged with doing that, irrespective of the Supreme Court decision, though with the Supreme Court decision that obviously puts an emphasis on doing so quickly. And so all our motion, there's a lot of specifics in here, and we worked with the advocates and talked about what some of those things can be, but we would reiterate that if we're raising the amounts of money that can be raised or anything like that, that we also look at, as you spoke to earlier, that balance of incentivizing people to participate, but also creating that robust system that the voters asked us to create, and that it's fair and equitable and accessible to as many people, as well as, for a district like ours, Council District 14, to keep in mind, as if we're doing sort of across-the-board requirements, that we take into consideration, if you're doing in-district fundraising, which we believe you should do at some point, that it's, scaled down to different communities, right, whether lower-income communities versus, upper-income communities. But in any case, we're just reiterating what everybody else is saying. We'd like to see this move forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Brenton Tesler, and I work for the office of Councilmember Englander. And
Who?
Councilmember Mitchell.
Oh, the new guy, right.
Yes, the new guy. Very, very, very proud to say. And just want to...
That's the new regime.
New regime's going very well.
Good.
A lot of new things going on.
Right.
So, no, I just, of course, wanted to first start off by thanking the chair for scheduling this so promptly. And this is something from Councilmember Englander, something that, we have felt has been sort of in a long time in coming. 20 years ago, 1990, the original Measure H was passed by voters of Los Angeles to implement, I think, what people thought were some very well-intentioned, ideas for producing kind of fair campaigns. Over the last 2 decades, though, I think there's been some notable changes, obviously from our motion, starting with the Supreme Court, and a number of decisions have greatly shifted the balance to candidates who are backed by well-funded independent expenditure campaigns, and also the city at one point used to have a very kind of fair system for candidates who are facing candidates that could self-finance, very means and mechanisms to help counter that, and all of that has been deemed unconstitutional. And then just in the last few weeks, we've had this decision, the Arizona Free Enterprise Club decision, which is basically made unconstitutional any kind of public financing system that takes into account somebody who's facing, again, candidate that is well-funded or is supported by independent expenditure campaigns. Also, I think there's a notable difference over the last 20 years. The costs of campaigning have gone drastically up. Obviously, the price of a stamp, as we noted, is practically doubled. The cost for effectively communicating a message, printing, advertising, and so forth escalates every year. 20 years ago, you didn't need to have someone on your staff who was fluent in HTML, and there were things that we were doing 20 years ago that we weren't doing 20 years ago that are integral parts of campaigns today. And in order for candidates who are not backed by independent expenditure campaigns or are not blessed to have the funds to self-finance, they have to spend a lot of time raising money in these very small increments, these increments that have not changed over 20 years, just to be competitive and just to keep up. So what we're asking for today, and this is a provision that is within the charter that is all outlined in the charter, is that we take the limits that were established in 1990, and we adjust them for inflation, as I said, as allowed by the charter. Ideally, what we would like to see is a system that, starting at the beginning of the next fiscal year, that would be July 2012, we would raise all of the limits related to campaigns, contributions, and spending limits. We would adjust them from their 1990 values to current values of today. And then every year after that, we would adjust them according to inflation and so on. Just to note, both the FEC and the Fair Political Practices Commission adjusts contribution limits regularly for both federal candidates and for both state candidates, and the city itself adjusts our contribution limits for the matching fund and their requirements, and they're adjusted according to inflation every year. And we would just ask for a similar system to be applied for spending limits. We would also ask for this to apply to office holder committee as well. Obviously, at a time when we want to be out there and support groups, and again, the static contribution limits kind of limits what we do, considering that the price always of whatever your legal fees for treasurer, the costs for printing, all of these other things keep escalating, meaning what you can do and how you interact with voters goes fewer and fewer. So we would ask that this process be started as soon as possible with a target date, giving council options for implementing something at the beginning of next fiscal year. And again, I just wanted to thank you for scheduling this, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Do you have any idea how much 500 in 1990 is now?
I honestly, offhand, I honestly don't know based on where you were. I think as a guess, maybe closer to 700, 750. I could be wrong, but honestly, I don't know.
The calculator I just found while you're talking said $823.
800, okay.
In 2010 dollars.
8,000, okay.
So not bad. Which isn't as scary number as I think some people when they're like, whoa, what is this going to do? But great. Well, there's a bunch of stuff in here. The Englander motion is a straightforward, I think, request. The Weezer motion has a number of different things that require studying, from the increasing the match rates to changing the rules for how people are qualifying for matching funds, and then looking at the amounts to qualify as well as expending, then also looking at expenditure limits as well. I think that's similar. And yeah, I mean, we will remove, I think, the trigger provisions of the matching fund system, so 5, and Mr. Weezar's should go forward. What I'd like to do is hear public comment from anybody else. I know Trent and Kathy also had numbers 3 and 4, so do you guys want to come up and comment on these two? And then we'll see what we can move forward.
Okay. Trent Lang, California Clean Money Campaign again. We are very much in favor of the sorts of things that the Weezer motion is attempting to do in terms of strengthening the current system. We believe Measure H gives a mandate for that. As mentioned before, I think we need to make sure that the system helps constituents, encourages constituents to get more involved in the system, and especially in terms of helping qualify. Currently, under the current system, candidates could raise all $25,000 they need to require from outside of their district or even outside of the city of Los Angeles. So this motion has some very valuable proposals based off of experiences in other states and localities. In terms of making it more responsive to constituents for qualifying, in terms of making candidates have more money to use up front and therefore responding to the Arizona system, increasing the matching funds rate to a 4 or 5 times rate within the district or within the city at least, we think is a strong way to make smaller donors' voices be heard and make it worth candidates' while to go out and do that. And then in context of such a package with those sorts of reforms for qualifying and how candidates get their matching funds, then that is a place where it makes a lot of sense to then raise the spending limits so that the public is getting something in return. The public is getting candidates that are more responsive to their constituents and to smaller donors in return for raising the spending caps. I think we would have concerns and want to look very carefully at the raising contribution limits. And one of the things that perhaps the study could look into would be comparing how the city's contribution limits compare to other jurisdictions. They are not particularly low for other jurisdictions in our belief, but that would be a good part of the study. And one last point is that if the two, since these are two competing proposals, I would say in a way for amending, for modifying the public financing system, if there was a way for council to be able to consider them both at the same time, that might be a useful addition so that they can compare the two when they're considering both.
Thanks, John.
So again, I think Trent said most of it. The main thing is.
Go first next time. So.
All right, I'm happy to let him start. So Kathy Fung with Common Cause. I think that if I wouldn't necessarily say that there are two competing proposals, because I'm hopeful that actually once the city council members start to see what the possibilities are, there may be a merging of ideas, because I think we're all going along the same track. It's just that we need to talk about the whole piece together. If the England or Krikorian piece is not specifically just about trying to amend it in time for the special election for City Council 15, then I think it is appropriate to extend the reporting period beyond 30 days so that A, the Ethics Commission has a chance to meet and talk about it in context of kind of the whole big piece, and B, the City Council has a chance to look at those proposals side by side, or even that there's an opportunity to bring something together, whatever that might be. So if 90 days makes sense or 60 days makes sense, I certainly know that the Ethics Commission doesn't come back until September, is that right? So at the very least, it should be far out enough for the Ethics Commission to sit down and have a good conversation about this.
I want to be on the Ethics Commission. Get all of August off. No, I know. Trust me, I know. We'll be working hard. As I always point out during our August recess, we are still working. We're just not meeting. Thank you both. I think, one of the things just for the advocacy community to consider, and two people I consider friends and who've been able to work with quite a bit, I understand that if we give the politicians what they want, we might lose leverage on the other things. And so I understand that, wanting to move both of them together. But I also think for the advocacy community, it's important to ask that central question of, okay, if nobody had introduced a motion, because it has been decades, what do we believe as advocates on fair elections that this should be done, where we advocate this just on the merits of itself? Right. I understand it can be seen as leverage because suddenly maybe politicians want this and, right, make it easier and we'll get more money and all of those sorts of things. But as much as money can corrupt, speech also cultivates, and speech has been reduced over time. I mean, there's in my opinion, no way around that. And you're right, it is more expensive than other places, but trust me, getting a radio ad in Los Angeles is, but with a couple exceptions, about as expensive as it gets. So keeping that going, again, just gets back to that same point of how much time do we spend actually on the activity of fundraising, and then when we have it, to what end? Do we get to touch enough voters?
If I could just say
Sure.
something. So at the national level, and it's important to think about this, kind of how it fits into the national conversation, there has been a significant shift in the way we think about public financing. It used to be that we used to just push hard for full public financing, all clean money. It would be fantastic if we could just get everybody off of that fundraising treadmill. We recognize both for budgetary reasons and also because whatever, that's not always the only option that can be pursued. So I think the big push now at the national level is to try to have matching fund systems that are high matches, so 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1, in part because what you do is you give people who are showing that they're qualified candidates a big chunk of money up front, which then allows them to run a very robust, good campaign. And if they're not running up against a competitor, great, just do what you need to do in order to communicate with your constituents and focus on that as opposed to just constantly going to donor events. The second piece of it is to emphasize that the people that you're raising the money from. And whatever that right level is, I don't know what that is, in terms of the contribution limits, it is important to think about the idea that we want to incentivize people raising money from within their district or at least within the city, because that's who you ultimately, when you're thinking about policy decisions, you should be thinking about who that impact is. I think that I don't think of this as just about, I don't want to give the politician something just because,
Sure.
it's candy without doing your math homework.
Without eating your vegetables.
Right. But I do think of this as, if we're going to adjust the system, we need to make sure that we don't remove from it the very goals that we were originally aiming for. So if this just becomes about increasing the spending limits, then you still have people on that fundraising treadmill, and you still have the money chase that I think we were all trying to help you guys get off of. And you don't necessarily incentivize people talking to their constituents. So again, if we just think about what are we trying to get at, I think the other piece about the Huizar proposal is, speaking to some of the concerns that were raised by other entities, I think, based on the math that we've done, and I trust Trent because I wouldn't touch the calculator, but I believe that he figured it out, and that is that even with the adjustments that we're talking about, we're not talking about tapping into spending any more general fund dollars than we currently have in the trust fund. And while we are hopeful that one day it will grow,
No, I had the same
the
rejoinder in my head when he
the
said that.
proposal
Yeah.
right now is still, don't spend any more than what you got. So I think that we can do this within the current budgetary limitations, as well as take into account some of the ideas that are right, that Corian and Englander have come up with, but just paired with a couple of other pieces that get that system of incentives right. So.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to put my cards on the table. I have Betty White waiting downstairs, and if you know Betty White, you do not want to cross her. So I'm going to move to number 5, ask at number 3 and 4 that we send to the council, first of all, just in case there's any discussion in terms of how we can direct how some reports back will be looked at. So let's move that to the council, as well as the communication from the chair with options for council action from those motions. Okay. Go to item number 5, and Ann Williams, if you'd like to come on forward. And Kathy did not fill out a card for this, but Trent did, going for all 5, full house. You can come forward too, but you'll have to go second this time. Go ahead, Ann.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Williams with the Central City Association. By way of background, we opposed Charter Amendment H because we felt it was overkill and at the same time missed the mark for meaningful reform. But that said, today we get a lot of questions about Measure H and its implementation and the new restrictions from our membership. So we just want to be certain that we fully understand what's being proposed and that our members have an opportunity to weigh in. And I think the ordinance just came out, the draft ordinance, I think on Friday, and it's pretty long. So we ask that you please do not send the matter to council until we've had more time to review and circulate the ordinance and give it some more analysis. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Ann. Appreciate it. Trent? I know you probably have the same view, but.
Yeah, I know. I just left here. Trent Lang, California Clean Money Campaign. I guess we also need a little bit more time to look at the ordinance. Want to encourage it to be interpreted as broadly as possible, especially in terms of limiting fundraising for contractors that fall under the purview of the law. I believe that's what the voters intended. I know there are considerations in terms of legalities, as the city attorney has went in. So we just wanted to say that we encourage as broad an interpretation as could possibly be legal on the fundraising front, especially.
Okay, why don't we bring city attorney and ethics staff back up to the table on those rare moments when we sometimes disagree or have different opinions. Let's just talk logistics. In terms of people wanting more time, city attorney, the effect of Measure H is in full force from an ethics commission, city attorney ethics commission jointly, I forget who said it, opinion that it is in effect now?
It is. Yes.
Correct. So the implementation, what's this gap, this gray land between it's in effect and this implementation ordinance? Where are we in terms of how it actually works?
Go ahead.
City attorney, why not? Legally.
The ordinance fleshes out details relating to the charter amendment. The charter amendment didn't define every single term, and some of the administrative details of how the measure would work. So the ordinance essentially provides those details to provide a more robust understanding of what the law requires. That's basically it. It does. This ordinance also changes a few other things. Just in terms of technicalities, in terms of removing reference to the cap regarding the matching funds trust fund, which was still in the administrative code, and recommend repealing two related provisions in the ethics ordinance that related to disclosure for contract bidders, which now is essentially obsolete by virtue of Measure H.
I mean, having looked at it, to the folks who want to look at it more, the main issue is whether or not fundraising by bidders, subcontractors, and the principals, whether they can do, we would prohibit any fundraising they do. In other words, going to people who are not related to contracts, friends they know and others, and saying, hey, support this person. I happen to be looking for a contract with the city, but I can't raise from my company, relatives, et cetera, but you can, and whether they should be able to play that role, or whether or not they can do that and would just be prohibited from raising from the immediate, I think we defined it before, the immediate principals as well as subcontractors and bidders. You know, when I wrote it, and I, respectfully disagree with the comments made about whether it missed the mark or not. I think we've had a very similar system at Metro and MTA, and it's not prohibited them from doing good public policy or from people having their free speech, and certainly from supporting those people who are elected officials on the MTA board. And it's a much narrower window, and it's much less restrictive even than that. I'm concerned with the legal challenges that have been put out there, and I while my heart says go for the full one, I understand as well that there may be challenges. Now, whether people would challenge or not is a whole other thing. So I know you have an abundance of caution. Maybe bring it on. Let's have some more of these court cases to see, and maybe we'll get some better decisions in the future. If we moved with one while we're looking at the legal issues on the other, is there a timeliness that you think we need to have that defined pretty quickly? I mean, in other words, we could go with the less restrictive one, but still always add the more restrictive language if as a policy matter, people decide to take that risk.
Certainly, the council could adopt a more narrow provision while we continue to study and perhaps develop more data while we and look for future court cases that would provide more clarity to whether even a broader prohibition would be workable. I wouldn't, at this point in time, we should not go without a definition of prohibited fundraising, because just having the term itself in the charter without a definition
not a good place to be.
Is vague.
Right.
Is vague.
No, I think at a minimum we obviously have to do draft A. The CLA has a recommendation on this, looking at both those just as a
Certainly would just be to move forward with I think it's Ordinance A that's attached to the city attorney's report.
City ethics. I wasn't going to forget you.
Well, thank you very much, Heather Holt for the Ethics Commission, and we completely agree that prohibited fundraising should be defined. But as we advocated when the discussions were had about whether to put Measure H on the ballot or not, we continue to feel like this definition, or the definition of prohibited fundraising in Ordinance B, is acceptable in terms of the case law that has come down, because it is narrowly defined in terms of the duration, in terms of the contracts that it applies to. The scope has been narrowed on the front end because only contracts of $100,000 or more fall within the law. We also believe that it's narrow because the prohibitions apply only to the elected officials who would be involved in approving that contract. So if only the City Council approves it, then it doesn't prohibit a contractor's ability to give to a mayoral candidate, for example. We also think that it's narrow because the definition itself, even though it applies to fundraising with anyone, not just those associated with the contractor's business, the activities themselves are specifically related to typical fundraising activities. In the case that's mentioned in the city attorney's report that struck down a prohibition on fundraising, not only did the prohibition apply to all contractors of any size, not just the $100,000 or more, but their definition of fundraising was extremely broad and included things such as serving as a treasurer for a campaign committee. And that's not at all what's included in the definition, even in Ordinance B. So we feel like what the voters were approving through Measure H was fundraising, not fundraising directed at your employees or your principals or subcontractors. We also, yes, and I just lost my thought. Yeah. The other thing is the loophole. This would, Ordinance A would create a huge loophole in that contractors could, the pool of people they could not raise funds from would be very small in comparison to the pool of people that they could raise funds from, and so their fundraising capabilities for city candidates would be as great as, essentially, if there weren't the prohibition or the definition in Ordinance A.
I think we have a week till this gets to council, so for both the public comment folks and if people want to at that point, I think you can in a week look at which one of those two you think is best, and certainly I'll listen on both sides to that. But I think I'd like to move it forward just because we are in this gray space. I think I'll be happy to support B. Also, A, if there's not the will to do B, I'm not going to protest a vote and not do A if B isn't approved. I had an interesting lunch with an individual who works at NBC Universal who said because of the MTA, there was a tunnel that the MTA was supposed to build across the street from Universal. When MTA took over that land, there's still negotiations with the MTA, but under MTA law, if there might be a decision made on something or a settlement for 4 years, somebody can't. And so they're saying, I wasn't pitching anybody, but they're saying we can't contribute to any mayoral candidates because each of them, whoever wins, will be on the board, and it could be in that 4-year period, and we'd still be under threat of litigation. I mean, that to me, and so they had to send a memo to 30,000 NBC Universal employees that none of them can give to the mayor's race. And I'm sure if somebody challenged that, something like that would be thrown out, because that's a lot of people's First Amendment rights to back somebody, et cetera. So I do believe that there are ways that we do overreach and can overreach, and things can be too restrictive. I'm not a complete purist on this, but I do think that the intention, certainly as the author of H, was to try to go as far as we can. So I love our CLA, respect his recommendation based on sound legal advice. The same thing with our city attorney, but I'll send them both forward to the council so they can consider that, and I'll continue that the public pronouncement from my side as chair. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. This meeting is adjourned.